this hour, and welcome on behalf of myself and Frit Landman, CEO of SGI, and myself on behalf of Flirt Rock. We have an interesting topic today on the unique challenges faced by the boards of SOEs. Opening remarks on a topic which I think I wouldn't be too dramatic to say is probably in South Africa, and maybe not only in South Africa, but in other countries, quite a controversial topic. With many opinions, I think as many people as we have out there, you will find the number of opinions and perceptions around what the problems are in state-owned entities and public sector. But as I've tried to also say in the little write-up to invite you to the session today, let us be very honest for those of us who are also in the private sector, that we do not have a lot to be proud of. Our scorecard is not looking great. We've had our fair share of corporate disasters. And so I think a disaster, whether you call it a corporate disaster or anything else, is something that we've seen in both public sector and private sector. So we were talking this morning, in Flirt Rock, we also assist public sector entities, and we provide services to boards of public entities. And Ronelle and I were talking this morning about the emotional impact of that on our staff members. And it sounds very dramatic, but we have found that we've actually had, some really serious challenges with some of our staff members operating in those entities. Ayanda, if you got a problem with the audio, I hope I see you asking a question, whether it's clear for the rest of the group. So I do hope my audio is fine for most of you. But to come back to the point around, it is an extremely challenging environment in which to operate. Thank you there for confirming. It really is an extremely difficult environment in which to operate. So I think, we've got to understand, and the intention of today, and having William here, is that we all, as I've said, we all have our perceptions and our opinions, and we're quite quick very often to point fingers and to judge. And so the intention of today is to really try and take an honest step back, look holistically at the picture, look at what could be some of the causes that we have, but also what are some of the solutions, and how can we, also those of us in public sector and also in the private sector, what can we do? What value is there that we can add? What contribution can we make? And I don't think we can have a better person. I think we're quite privileged to have somebody of the stature of Professor William Gumede with us. To give you an idea of William's background, he's got quite an illustrious career, interesting man, apart from being a political analyst and an economist, and we'll touch on, maybe if we've got time, we will touch on that as well. But he's an associate professor at the School of Governance at the University of Witwatersrand. And let me not make the same mistake I did last time with Prof Basi to say, I think I said the University of South Africa, so I made quite sure this time around that I get it right. He's at the University of Witwatersrand. He runs a public finance and economics course at the School of Governance, including, quite interesting, I don't know if any of you have ever thought about this. He runs a course on how to put together the national budget for members of parliament. So he trains members of parliament of all the political parties. They all have to sign up to his course, and he trains them on how you put a national budget together for parliament. And he leads that program here in South Africa, but he also runs the program for MPs of the British Commonwealth on financial management of their parliaments and how to conduct themselves ethically. So William is very highly regarded, not only in South Africa, but internationally on this topic as well. So I think, as I've said, we've got the right person in the room to talk to us. He was the principal advisor to the Presidential Review Committee on State-Owned Enterprises that was done from 2009 to 2013, that actually made proposals on the restructuring of SOEs in South Africa. So he's been very involved with DPE, helping National Treasury quite a bit. I know that William has served as an independent non-executive director of the National Blood Service for many years as well. So he's been the CCMA. He's really operated not only as an academic, but practically, working in the trenches and the ditches with us in the public sector. He was also a senior associate and a program director at the University of London. So he is actually, what do we call it, not only versed in this locally, but has very much a global experience with Oxford and in London, in New York. He's at Cambridge University, and he's an author. I must tell you, if you ever get onto William's WhatsApp profile pic, I said to him, it was so interesting. It was actually such a moving picture, because he recently, I think, also wrote a children's book about the world being upside down. And his profile picture shows him addressing toddlers, youngsters in a nursery school about his book. So William spends time with MPs in the Commonwealth, and he spends time with 5-year-olds at nursery schools. He's also, one of his recent books on South Africa in BRICS. William really has an extremely wide experience and strong opinions. He's one of for me, such a quiet, humble man. And I think you can sometimes mistake or misjudge him because of the quiet, calm way he has about him. But do not underestimate the man. He's extremely sharp. He's also the executive chairman of a foundation, Democracy Works Foundation, that he started himself. And I really want to invite you to try and just go and Google Democracy Works Foundation. Some very, very interesting material that talks to the political environment, that talks to, things happening around us as well. So there's some really good food for thought on that website as well. William, I've introduced you. Everybody knows how great a guy you are and how privileged we are to have you with us. So with any further ado, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna-Marie. Thank you for inviting me. I am going to blame your team for making me struggle to get in.
We will give them a clap afterwards.
I'll do the presentation very short, and then we have more questions, more time for questions. Thank you, Frick. Also, thank you for the logistical team. The first thing is, why should we care about SOEs? Why should we bother about it? I think just the first thing is, since 1994, you think about it, trillions have been lost in SOE bailouts, corruption, and mismanagement. It's a drain on growth, it's a drain on development, it's a drain on jobs, and also undermine economic stability. And money is diverted from essential public services, from education, health, housing, and so on. But it also crowds out, and people often never think about it, it crowds out entrepreneurs and new businesses. So, if there's a SOE, a failing SOE in a certain market, in a certain space, and a new entrepreneur wants to enter into that space or new business, you can't enter in that because, the whole space is blocked. So the opportunity cost really of having SOEs in the economy also undermines new job creation, entrepreneurship, and so on. And of course, there's sort of the very obvious things: rising debt, and then the public server in the public, have to cut spending in really critical services. And of course, for the ordinary person, rising taxes. And now we've seen it, I mean, this week, was it yesterday? We just got a loan from the IMF. Now, why do we have to go to the IMF and to BRICS and to other lenders? It is because, SOEs is one of the reasons, the drain on the fiscal and on our finances cause us, our government, to go look for money elsewhere. It's very important that we care about SOEs. Now, what has been happening the last few weeks? Clearly, it appears that the COVID-19 economic crisis, the rising unemployment, the factory closures, and so on, has offered SOEs and their management and their boards new opportunities to reboot. So they've seen this COVID-19 as an opportunity to reboot, but to reboot without necessary structural reforms that is needed. Just look at it, SAA, they're now SABC, Land Bank, they're all in financial trouble now. They all have been asking for bailouts during this COVID-19 periods. Now, before COVID-19, Pravin Gordhan and Tito were really tough on SOE reform. They wanted to close down some SOE.
William, I think our sound has gone for a second. I think we've lost you a little bit there. Don't know what the reason is for the quality of our sound not being great. Seems like today is going to be a struggle. Okay, so here I am back on. I think maybe I should take over the presentation and continue with what William was trying to tell us, ladies and gentlemen, what's going on today, but like really not having a lot of luck. And I don't think William realizes that he's probably off and they've lost him. Wayne, if you can please get William back for us, because I think he's moving on to his next slide.
I think,
not realizing that.
Anna-Marie, I think his connection is not so strong on that side. Let's see when we get him back and maybe cancel his camera and just allow the voice.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good idea. And I think I'll go off camera as well so that we really just have voice to continue.
Am I back up?
William, you are. Maybe we've just agreed maybe to switch off your, let's switch off cameras and that just
do that,
with the audio. Okay?
Okay, now apologies for
you can
that.
Continue.
I'll go on. Can I go ahead? Really, so just maybe to recapture the last point, that many SOEs, the boards and management are now using the COVID-19 as an opportunity to get more bailouts, but without doing the structural reforms. Now, we have to ask the question, why do we have so many problems in SOEs? So the very first one is that we've got system capture. And when I say system capture, it means that the whole system in South Africa, whether it's the ANC, is the party, the state, parliament, many democratic institutions, and many policies are captured. And then the capture of the ANC, cadre deployment, lack of trust among the ANC in non-ANC expertise, and then also the administrative culture of the state. The state, like any organization, whether, like a business, it has a certain organizational culture. Now, that culture has been captured. And then there's been a capture of laws and a capture of policies and regulatory frameworks. So we have the laws, we have the regulatory frameworks, but, they're not working because they've been captured or manipulated. Then there's also the capture of democratic oversight institutions. Parliament is supposed to an oversight over SOEs and, of course, over other. But, Parliament does not do its work. And then, of course, things like the capture of police, investigations and prosecuting authorities means that, even if there's wrongdoing, if someone is politically protected and politically very high up, that person is not going to be prosecuted, or there's going to be very slow in prosecution. And then just the ignorance of laws. I mean, we've got many corporate governance laws in the country. We've got a PMFA, there's a New Companies Act, and so on. But, many of these laws are just being ignored. So the system capture allows for SOE capture. What is, to get a little bit more to the micro part of it, of our problems. The board appointment system in SOEs is faulty, so the whole system. So we've got, and because it's faulty, we have incompetent boards and often incompetent executives. Now, the very first problem is that appointments in the SOE space, board appointments are opaque, it's shrouded in secrecy, and it's often are very irrational. Now, there's a constitutional requirement for fairness in appointments of all public entities, but in many cases, it is mostly ignored. And with few exceptions, there's no legal requirement for participation in appointments. Now, you have to think about it as a SOE, a state-owned enterprise. It's a public enterprise, so there has to be public participation. Of course, not only in appointments, but also in other oversight. Citizens are supposed to be allowed because it's a public entity. If you're a public entity, every citizen is a shareholder in a public entity. Then there's no standardized criteria for appointments to boards. I mean, the NEL, for example, would have a different way of board appointments. The SABC would have a different way of board appointments. So, it's not standardized. And because it's not standardized, we get poor quality appointments, and also it's very difficult to challenge appointments because it's not standardized. And often boards lack industry appropriate skills. Professionals, there's often very little diversity on boards, diversity from gender to also expertise at diversity, and diversity in terms of, commercial and public sector experience and so on. But we often see a recycling of politically exposed individuals. When I say politically exposed individuals, it's often people who've been part of the political party, part of the ANC, or people who've been involved in other boards and they've been failures, but they get reappointed. So it's a whole recycling of individuals. And maybe lastly, there's a concentration of power of appointments in the executive. I mean, the president, for example, has the power to appoint almost every director in an SOE board. Now, you must imagine, I did an audit for the presidency in 2009 of, how many state-owned entities there are. And on my account, my count of it, there was about just over 850 state-owned entities. Now, you must just imagine then, if the president has the power to appoint almost every board member of all of these 850 state-owned entities, it's an over-concentration of power. And in no way that a president as an individual, would be able to, evaluate the quality of so many people that he needs to appoint. And then often there's also a concentration of power in the executive authorities. This is the line ministries. Line ministries can also often, they can recruit people and they don't have to make it public, or they can make it public after they've already made an appointment, and so on. Now, what kind of reforms are needed? Now, the very first thing is we really have to make board appointments more transparent. then what we need to do, we need to bar politicians from board appointments and also bar civil servants from boards. And then also get the politically exposed people away from boards. And we have to insist on public participation to all SOE board appointments. And then we have to insist that SOE boards regularly assess the performance of board members. And then they make these assessments publicly available, because the SOE is a public organization. And there has to be regular lifestyle audits of board members. And then we need more transparency, easy public, and the public needs to have easy access. And there has to be an obligation to have citizens, the private sector and civil society at AGMs of SOEs. Now we need the right people with the right skills at the right time. And we should standardize the rules for legibility, of board members, and also for their removal. Nominations to boards should be made publicly available. And those who were rejected from being shortlisted should be compared publicly to those who were eventually appointed. Because often, when you look at people who apply to become board members, and then you look at the people who actually got appointed, and then you have to ask yourself, what went wrong? Because the people who get appointed, if you compare them to the people who've been excluded, it's a vast difference in the quality of people. So the quality of people who are often rejected, the quality is so high, and those who are appointed, the quality is so poor. You have to have better mechanisms to contest board appointments. Citizens, civil society, the private sector should help to draw up a list of compromised individuals that should not be appointed to SOE boards. Now, what can civil society do? What can the private sector do? What can citizens do? Now, Chapter 10 of the Constitution really says that democratic values should underpin public administration, and that means it should also guide SOE appointments. So what citizens can do is they can push for legislation to make public participation in board appointments compulsory. Citizens should actively nominate credible candidates. And as I said earlier, they should help draw up a list of compromised individuals. And then people should use the courts to declare errant board members delinquent. You remember just, was it a few months ago that Solidarity went to court, or rather won, when they took Mrs. Menheni, who was former SAA chairwoman, to court and asked the court to declare her a delinquent director. More citizens and civil society and private sector groups must do that. If you see, someone who is really a compromised a director, then please, if you have the resources, go to court, take the person on. And then lastly, citizens should actually attend annual general meetings of SOEs and then contest decisions there. Thank you. This is the end of my presentation, and I'll open up for questions.
Thank you, William. I think you've touched on a few very important points, and before I sort of flip loose on you as well, I see our audience is very quiet. They normally have already by now shot us with quite a few comments and observations and questions. So hopefully those will come as well. But from my point, I fully agree with you that the appointment process is defective and dysfunctional. And in fact, I've raised this with them as well. So if you look at some time, and I think I've read on our calls before, there was a study done in 2013 around 40 corporate disasters and what the root causes of those disasters were. And the number one cause was the MED skills and influence. In other words, the people in the room. They have such a huge impact on the efficiency and the success of an entity. You know, they're not just a figurehead or there for ceremonial reasons. I try and convey this message whenever I do training with board members as well, that, you know, you actually have a real impact. And whether that impact is good or bad depends on your functionality and your efficiency, and you having the right people in the room, understanding what your role is. So I fully agree with you that that's critical. But what I want to ask is, if you take, for example, now SAA, you know, whatever it's going to be called, let's just refer to it as SAA, our new SAA. I ask myself, where is the minister going to find capable people who understands what it takes to be a director, that will be willing to put their hand up and say, you know, pick, what did our president say when he was, you know, pick me or I'll go, or send me, you know, send me. I'll go into the boardroom at SAA, knowing what we know. You know, where do we find those people? So that would be one of my questions, and I'm going to ask Frick to start. I see our questions, our audience are with us now. So, William, maybe you can just respond to that.
No, absolutely. You know, I understand when people don't want to, you know, go step forward and accept, nominations to SOE boards, because, you know, often, unfortunately, SOE boards have also caused, many or damage the reputations of many, you know, good people who, you know, who tried their best and who joined and then discovered actually, you know what, they're surrounded there by really bad people on these boards. And then they go down with the bad people. But having said that, it will be really important, you know, for the for SAA, but also for other entities, that people do step forward. But it's most probably even more important. There's a president and, you know, government, you know, open up the space for the best people in the country, you know, to apply, because unfortunately, Anna-Marie, often, you know, these appointments are very close affairs. You know, just a few people are selected and, you know, in all sorts of secrecy. So, you know, that a president and also, cabinet need to open up to, these appointments widely as possible, and then they must apply their minds, you know, also rigorously to get the best people, not to get, recycle people, their own friends, you know, cadres, and so on. And they must make certain that, you know, that these boards are diverse in terms of skills, you know, and not only, when I say diverse, not only South Africans, but also non-South Africans with, with a skill set.
William, I think if I see all the comments on the side, there's a lot of agreement with you. A question and some sentiments coming from Ayanda Trebe and Oscar Magudulela is saying transparency is important, but they're not so certain that public participation in the appointment process will be a realistic avenue to follow. It might be a very tedious process. What would be your comment on that?
You know, I think public participation is crucial. You know, we can make it simple. We don't have to make it complicated. I just one example. You know, if let's just say the new SAA board is appointed, there has to be a process where the public can say, well, so-and-so applied with all of the skills. Here's the person's CV. Tell us, why was this person not appointed, but somebody else has been appointed? And make the comparisons. You know, that's just one simple thing. So public, you know, it doesn't have to be the old style public participation. You know, we could modernize it and make it practical. But it is very important that we have public scrutiny over, you know, board appointments, and we can find practical ways to make that possible.
Yeah, there's also a question coming in again from Oscar saying that and maybe it deviates a little bit from where you are, looking more to the remedy side, is where do you suggest is the immediate intervention needed for the horrendous state that the SOEs are in? It's a sentiment or a question also asked by Motobi.
The very first thing we have to ask ourselves: do we need some SOEs? That's the very first thing. SOEs, the whole rationale for SOEs, you can't just have an SOE for ideological reasons or just for employment creation and so on. No, that's why SOEs fail. So SOEs there has to be a rationale, and the rationale has to be, is it impossible for the private sector to produce or to deliver a service or make a product? If it's impossible, then there is a rationale for the SOE. If anyone else can do the job and do the job effectively, cheaply, there's no point in having the SOE in that space. So that really is the first thing that we have to do. The second thing we have to do of those SOEs that we keep, we then will have to say, well, if we're going to keep these SOEs, we better do the restructuring. We're going to have to clean up the management and the boards, and then the culture, the organizational culture of these SOEs. And there has to be clear conditions for any kind of support, and we have to monitor the restructuring, almost on a weekly or monthly basis. There has to be targets so that we are clear, where the restructuring and the reforms are going.
Thank you.
I think just to the point, Frick, that I see Shadrach making and Ayanda supporting him, the fact that the people are there, but they're not getting picked. So to your point, I think, William, if we can get transparency in the process, that's number one. I think that will definitely make the authorities apply their mind better before they put these names forward. That's one. If they know they're going to be challenged or held to account. But secondly, your other point, and I think this is going to start happening, that you're going to see civil society. So Outa was the one that took Dudumyeni to court and had her declared delinquent, which have don't underestimate the implications of that, for her. It's huge, financially, especially. So I think what we need is we need to support civil society more in their actions to do that on behalf of us as well. Don't know what your views are on that. William, you are still online with us? Is it only me, Frick, or have we lost William?
Think about it, SABC, SAA. Individuals will have to be brought accountable. We need to see heads roll. We need to see people pay back the money, but we're not seeing it. And, people have to go to court, civil society, to declare Ms. Meneni a delinquent director. Government has done nothing up to now.
Yeah, William, I think we lost you the first part of what you were responding to my comment. Maybe you just want to repeat that.
What I'm saying is it's very sad that there's no political will, to deal with incompetent directors or, willful directors, and that it has to be civil society again. They had to go to court to take on Mrs. Meneni and declare her a delinquent director. The government should have done that a long time ago.
I think much of what we've been saying, William, leads to Sihle's Ncube's question, saying that maybe the people out there who are credible directors, they are concerned about their reputation when they join a board on an SOE. Of an SOE nature. Do you think that's a justified reason for not joining?
Absolutely, it is justified. It is justified. I was just looking at, the last PRASA board, And that was a new board, and there were some really good people on there. But that board was then, when a board was dissolved, some really good people some of them actually never served on the SOE board before, and their reputations essentially was shredded thereafter. So, to get into this space now of serving on a SOE board, it's a really tricky space because your reputation could be destroyed. So I have sympathy for people, myself. I'll be very careful to serve on a SOE board. One has to be careful because reputations really covered.
William, I think your sound quality is going a little bit again, and maybe just to give it an opportunity to settle again. I'm looking at the comments, and Ayanda and Sishle and Dev, I want to also for us to sort of close off with your question about what can we do to change, this trend that we see. Because I agree with the ladies that things such as reputational risk is both in public and private sector. In fact, the corporate failures going out there, I've seen, because I wrote an article a while ago that spoke about, the risk for directors, because often when I do workshops with directors, I get the pushback from them saying, "No, Anne-Marie, we hear you about, liability and risk, but show us who's walking around in orange jumpsuits, So it's goggamak for baba bang, as we all say in Afrikaans, kind of thing. It's not, the risk is not that real, although it's more theoretical." And what I wrote in the article was to say, I'm seeing a few things happening which I think should make individuals wake up and just be alert. Number one, for example, in the corporate world with African Bank, there was the two minority shareholders that took the board of directors of African Bank to court on a claim for about 700, nearly 800 million. And yes, they were unsuccessful, and the Supreme Court of Appeal upheld the court's ruling on a very sound legal basis about directors' accountability to companies and not to shareholders. And this is what public sector directors must hear. You are accountable to the company, not to the shareholder. So that was upheld in our High Court. But I can tell you those individuals lost a lot of sleep and legal fees in fighting that. Civil society standing up, like Durumiyeni, is another dynamic. But the third one that I did highlight in my article was that we're quite involved in helping boards to find individuals for board seats, and on the other side, approaching individuals when a board is looking to fill a vacancy. And what I'm seeing from both sides are the sharpened scrutiny of companies or entities and people. Who were you associated with? What board have you sat on that, maybe? So, all of these things are very real implications which individuals need to understand could potentially also have an impact on their ability going forward to get board seats, be it in public or private sector. I think I fully agree with you on that one. William, you with us?
Yes.
William, so I think we are reaching towards the end, but I have two comments here which I want to link. One from Toby Sisele and Ayanda Trebe, and he is actually saying one cannot really differ from all of what has been said here in the comments and in your presentation, what Anne-Marie says. And most of that we really also know, but where is the practical, where is the practice? Where do we move from talk to action in the process? Now, Ayanda is also of the opinion that a lot of these recommendations are in the SOE review board, But the question is begging, who is willing to start the reform? Is there a deep willingness to start this reform?
Yes, Ayanda, I mean, a lot of these things, I was advisor to the presidential reform. Now, there's a presidential review process, was in 2009 already. So you must say, 2009. So, it does appear that there's no political will because, it's report after report after report. Nobody seems to take the recommendations seriously from the government side. So, it's not that we, as a country, that we don't have ideas. The ideas are there, and even it's also even not that we don't have laws. I mean, if SOE just implement the Companies Act, for example, there will be good governance, or just the PMFA on itself. So clearly, then, what is the problem? The problem then is political will. Now, if there's no political will, what do we do? I mean, one of the things we can do is, for example, go to court and hold people individually accountable, so and so on. The other thing is, I guess, from a politics point of view of how we vote, or we could, for example, I mean, people haven't done it yet. If a board is appointed or a CEO of an entity is appointed, and we know the person is incompetent or compromised, then we take. Someone can go to court and take all of that whole board and the CEO or the CEO to court, and maybe we force political will through that process. Or if citizens go to AGMs of SOEs, that could be one way to force political will, because clearly now it appears that political will is not coming from above. So we'll have to find a way of bringing it, from a bottom-up process to try to almost enforce political will that way.
Thank you.
Now that's William, and I think that's the frustration for all of us, and I think for our participants today as well. Is exactly that point. I mean, you must be greatly frustrated. You have done so much work in giving the right advice and guidance and recommendations. It is not as though it's not there. I agree with Ayanda. There's the SOE review report, which you were instrumental in. Is there anything more you can do that, people like yourself, that with our support, that, we can actually get into where we need to be to find slowly but surely to the ship around?
I mean, again, firstly, it is frustrating, and it's frustrating for many other people also. For those people who've worked on it for many, many years, because government asks you and you diligently work on it and provide advice, and then it's ignored. And then, a couple of years thereafter, then there's another review, another inquiry, and then, and so on. So it's also a waste of public resources, of course. And then, of course, many others, many citizens are now fed up because they know they've got qualifications, they know, they can do the work, but, they're not politically connected, they are not asked to or appointed to boards where they can, do the job. So I think it's going to be most important for us to recommend people to government. If we see, SAA is looking for board members, that we as, the public suggest people to say, there's so-and-so who's really good. Appoint this person or interview this person. So, so we'll have to be, we can't give up. So we'll have to continue to be proactive and do that. And then we must also challenge appointments which is not rational, which doesn't make sense. And then we must also go to court. If, our normal challenge, our normal avenues of protest is not working. But most importantly, we cannot give up.
Yeah, I think that's the critical point. We cannot give up. Ayanda, makes a bit of a tongue-in-cheek comment as well, but I know what she's talking about, an entity where she was involved in 346 billion capex program, and she says the chair has not even been a non-executive director of a funeral stockfell. Personally, I've had an interview with a person who was on the NED on one of the state-owned entities, and he said to me, Anne-Marie, I honestly don't know what I'm doing here because I do not have the ability to add any value. Now, you also ask yourself, then why did you accept that appointment? And I also sensed that there is that political pressure, you know, to put your hand up if you're called, and not to say, but I don't think I am sufficiently qualified.
No, absolutely. People, if you're appointed and you don't have the skill set and the competence, not to take up the post, that is also, good citizenship to decline and say, you know what, I think there are people better than me. I don't have the skill set, and then decline. It's good citizenship, and in fact, it's good corporate individual citizenship.
And it's also that intellectual honesty that we expect. I think, and Frick, I'm going to ask you to start, to wrap up for us. But from my side as well, one of the things that I have felt we need to look at is you've got your program on financial management. In my view, a person, doesn't matter who you are, but you should not be able to get onto the list of eligible candidates for state-owned entities if you have not gone through a certain development program. And, maybe depending on the level of the SOE, the content of the program could be adjusted accordingly, at a lower level, medium, and then at the big guns, the Escoms and the Transnets and those of this world. So, that's maybe one way we can look at it. But I think the transparency, we need to force this thing, transparent. And I think we need to work through the organizational and support the civil, societies and organizations that are out there, that we also hold them accountable. Let me also say that in the right way, that they are, because ultimately we are the shareholders of state-owned entities. In fact, not government, it's us, the citizen of South Africa. And as much as the shareholders, to your point, go to AGMs of listed companies and they question and they challenge, we should be starting to do the same. I think there's a lot of responsibility on us as well. And to your point, William, I fully agree, never give up. If you want to make a few sort of concluding remarks for us.
Yeah, I'm very grateful for having had William with us today, and I want to really congratulate him with the insights that he has given us. And I think what is most important, what I hear from him, is kind of his call for engagement for the ordinary citizen to kind of step to the plate and take up a more diligent role in what we see. And if you listen in South Africa, we had a conversation about this before, if you listen in South Africa to the public discourse, it's just a mudslinging contest. There's no real constructive conversation happening. The kind of constructive conversation that we have had here today is what you would like to see in the public discourse. And maybe ordinary citizens should participate more in a more constructive way and take that start of the Constitution where we say, we, the people of South Africa, to just realize what that really means. So I am also thankful for the audience that we have had today and their participation and the comments that they've made. In summary of what they are saying, agreeing with what William has shared with us, is their dire need for something practical to happen. Now, I imagine there are different stakeholders in that, but we, as the ordinary citizen, is the most important stakeholder, and maybe we should take up that challenge and start moving forward. But that, I would say, is my take from what we have had today. Anne-Marie, thank you. Thank you, William.